The prairie wind carried a restless whisper across the wide stretch of land, bending tall grass and stirring dust into the fading light of evening. The horizon stretched endless and unforgiving, painted in the colors of fire and ash as the sun sank behind the ridges. Out here, where silence often weighed heavier than words, a lone rider pressed forward, her hands trembling on the reins. She was young, with her belly round in the late stages of pregnancy, and though every step of her horse made her body ache, she did not slow down. There was no comfort waiting for her if she turned back. The life she carried gave her the strength to keep riding, though her heart was filled with fear. She had been running for days, guided only by instinct and desperation. The cabin she had left behind was no longer a home, but a cage where her spirit had withered. Every hoofbeat echoed like a drum of freedom and danger. She knew she could not outrun the land itself. Somewhere ahead lay unknown territory, wild and untamed, where survival was never promised. Somewhere behind trailed the shadows of men she prayed she would never see again. Between them stretched this vast wilderness, where her fate teetered on the edge of chance. The evening air turned sharp as the first stars appeared. Coyotes yipped in the distance, and her horse tossed its head uneasily. She knew what it meant. Something or someone was near. She pressed her hand against her side where the child stirred, as if sensing her fear. Then she saw it. A dark figure slumped near the edge of a creek bed, half hidden by brush and the tall grass. Her heart lurched. She could have urged her horse onward, passed by without a glance, but something held her. She pulled the reins, slowing to a stop, her pulse quickening as she studied the shape. It was a man. His bare chest was streaked with dirt and blood, his long hair tangled and matted, his breath shallow. Even in the dim light she recognized him as Apache, a warrior from the very people settlers whispered about in fear. He looked broken, abandoned to die where he had fallen. Instinct screamed at her to ride on. Helping him would only bring danger, perhaps to her and the child. But another instinct, deeper and stronger, rooted her to the spot. She knew what it meant to be left behind. She knew the helplessness of being wounded with no one to turn to. She slid from her horse, every step careful and slow. Her boots sank in the soft earth near the creek, and she knelt beside him. His eyes flickered open, dark and filled with a storm she could not read. He tried to lift a hand, but the strength failed him. She pressed her palm gently against his shoulder, whispering that she meant no harm, though she was unsure he understood. The warrior's breath rattled, and she saw the wound, a cruel gash across his side, torn and raw, the kind that would not wait long for help. Her mind raced. If she helped him, she risked everything. The Apache were known to be fierce protectors of their own, suspicious of outsiders, especially settlers. To be caught aiding one might mean death, yet walking away felt impossible. She could not let another soul perish when she still had the chance to act. In that moment, she stopped being a runaway and became something else, someone who chose compassion over fear. She tore a strip from her skirt and pressed it against the wound, ignoring the sting of blood on her hands. The warrior winced but did not push her away. She fetched water from the creek, trickling it against his lips. He drank weakly, his eyes never leaving hers. She wondered if he saw her fear or her resolve. Perhaps both. The night deepened, and still she stayed, tending him as best as she could. Every sound in the darkness made her heart hammer. An owl called. Branches cracked under unseen weight. She kept glancing over her shoulder, expecting riders to appear at any moment. Yet no one came. Only the steady breathing of the wounded Apache filled the silence, faint but alive. She knew she could not leave him here. Somehow, some way, she would have to move him or risk discovery at dawn. The thought terrified her, but another thought gave her courage. Perhaps helping him might also save her. If he lived, he might guide her through this land she did not understand, might be her shield against the dangers that lurked ahead. Or he might despise her, even kill her, once he regained his strength. She could not know. But she had already chosen, and there was no turning back. Hours passed before he spoke, his voice hoarse, his words heavy with an accent she strained to catch. She understood little, but she caught enough to know he asked why. Why would she help him? A stranger, an enemy to her people. She placed her hand over her heart and then her belly, whispering that she could not let life slip away, not his, not the child's. He watched her in silence, his gaze unreadable, yet something in his eyes softened. By the time the sky lightened with the pale gray of dawn, she was exhausted. Her clothes were stained, her hands raw, but the Apache still breathed. She knew that leaving this place was no longer simple. Somewhere in the distance, a drumbeat echoed faintly, like a call from another world. She did not know it yet, but others had already taken notice. The tribe would not leave their warrior to vanish into the dust. They would come searching, and when they found him, and her, the world she thought she knew would shift in ways she could not imagine. The sun lifted over the ridges, and the prairie seemed to hold its breath. The woman tightened the bandage once more, her body trembling with fatigue and fear. She rose to her feet, scanning the horizon. What she saw made her blood run cold. Figures on horseback, distant but closing in, their silhouettes fierce against the rising light. Her heart pounded, torn between flight and the warrior at her side. She clutched the reins of her horse, her hands shaking, her mind racing. She could ride and save herself, vanish into the hills, carrying her child into an uncertain freedom. Or she could stay, shield a man who might cost her everything. She knew the decision she made now would change not only her life, but the life of the one growing within her. And in that fragile moment, with riders nearing and the wounded Apache watching her every move, she realized her escape was no longer her own. The path ahead would bind her fate to his, in ways she could not yet see. The thunder of hooves grew louder, and the choice weighed heavy on her heart, unresolved. As the dawn broke fully over the wild land, the sound of hooves carried across the prairie like a storm rolling in. She stood frozen, one hand gripping the reins of her horse, the other still trembling from tending to the wounded Apache. Dust swirled on the horizon, growing thicker with each passing second. She knew there was no time left to weigh choices. Fear surged through her, yet her feet would not move. The man at her side, though weak, lifted his head with a faint spark in his eyes. He recognized the riders. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened, in the way he tried to push himself upright despite the pain tearing through him. She knelt quickly, urging him to stay still, whispering that he was not ready to rise. But he pushed against the earth, his pride fighting against the helplessness of his wounds. His words came in broken English, warning her that these were not men she could simply hide from. They were his people. She swallowed hard. 1,000 fears rushed into her mind. If his tribe found her kneeling over him, blood on her hands and his life clinging by a thread, what would they think? Would they believe she had harmed him? Or would they see the truth that she had fought to keep him alive through the night? The riders drew closer, and the earth seemed to tremble beneath their weight. She could see them now, their dark hair loose in the wind, their faces fierce, painted for battle or mourning. They rode with purpose, circling as hawks might. And when they spotted her and the fallen warrior, their cries cut through the stillness. The horses charged forward, stopping only when they surrounded her. She stood with her chin lifted, though her knees felt weak, the reins slipping from her grasp. One of the riders dismounted, a man older, his eyes sharp as flint. He looked from her to the wounded Apache, his expression unreadable. The others followed, fanning out, some glaring at her with suspicion, others focusing on the warrior, who lay pale and struggling for breath. She tried to speak, her voice catching as she explained in broken words that she had not harmed him. She showed them her torn skirt, the strips now pressed against his wound. Her hands shook, but she held them open, palms upward, as if to prove her honesty. The older man's eyes lingered on her belly, and she felt exposed, vulnerable beneath his gaze. Then he turned to the warrior, kneeling at his side, pressing his hand against the bandage. The Apache's eyes met his, and though their words were in a tongue she did not understand, she sensed the weight of what was being said. The warrior's weak voice carried, and she caught one word repeated often. Whatever he told them, it made the older man glance at her again, his expression shifting from suspicion to something more complicated. The tribe worked quickly, lifting the wounded man onto a stretcher woven from branches and hides. She stepped back, unsure if she was free to go or bound to stay. One of the younger riders pulled her horse closer, handing her the reins, but his eyes were cold, warning her that her presence was not yet welcomed. Still, they did not push her away. Instead, they motioned for her to follow. She hesitated, torn between fear and the pull of something greater. If she rode away now, she would be alone again, wandering into the wilderness with no protection and no path forward. If she stayed, she risked stepping into the heart of a people who might see her as an intruder. Her hand drifted to her belly as she made her choice.
Out.
She mounted her horse and followed them into the hills. The trail wound upward, the morning sun casting sharp shadows on the ridges. The riders moved swiftly, yet silently, their presence like a current she was caught in. She studied them as they rode, the way they carried themselves, the way their eyes seemed to pierce the land as if nothing escaped their notice. They did not look at her often, but when they did, their gazes were full of questions she could not answer. At last, they reached a hidden valley, where smoke curled from fires and voices rose from within the camp. Children ran to meet the riders, their laughter cutting through the heavy silence, but it faltered when they saw the stretcher. Women emerged from the lodges, their faces etched with worry as they hurried to tend the wounded warrior. She slid from her horse, uncertain where to stand, clutching the reins as if it might anchor her. Every glance felt like a weight pressing down on her. The older man spoke sharply, and the camp grew quiet. Then all eyes turned toward her. She wanted to speak, to tell them she meant no harm, but the words tangled in her throat. The wounded Apache lifted his head weakly, pointing toward her, his voice breaking as he spoke again. His words carried across the camp, and though she did not understand their meaning, she felt the shift in the air. Whispers spread quickly, women covering their mouths, men nodding gravely. Some looked at her with awe, others with doubt. The older man stepped forward, raising his hand. His voice carried, steady and commanding, and she caught fragments of words in English, pieced together with effort. He said the warrior should have died, but had not. He said the woman had stopped her escape to save him. And then, with words that made her blood run cold, he proclaimed her something she had never expected.
Sacred wife.
The sound of it rang through her mind, heavy and unshakable. She looked around, bewildered, trying to understand. The tribe bowed their heads, some with reverence, others reluctantly. She pressed her hands to her chest, shaking her head, whispering that they were wrong, that she was only a runaway searching for safety, but they did not see her that way anymore. To them, her act had bound her to their people, tied her fate to the wounded warrior. The women approached, their hands gentle yet firm, guiding her toward the lodges. She resisted at first, but their eyes softened, and they murmured words she could not understand, words that felt less like commands and more like acceptance. They seated her near the fire, offering food and water, watching closely as if she might vanish if left alone. She ate hesitantly, her stomach nodding, though the child within her stirred as if comforted by the warmth. Outside, she could hear the low hum of voices, the steady beat of drums, and the prayers rising for the warrior's recovery. She closed her eyes, exhaustion washing over her, but sleep would not come. Her thoughts raced. What did it mean to be proclaimed sacred wife? What expectations lay hidden in those words? She had fled one life only to stumble into another, one that pressed upon her with both promise and peril. As the day stretched on, she learned more through glances and gestures. The tribe treated her with a strange mixture of respect and distance. The children peered at her curiously, whispering behind their hands. The older women watched her closely, some nodding approval, others frowning in doubt. The men spoke little, their gazes unreadable, yet she could feel the weight of their decision pressing down on her, shaping a path she had not chosen. When night fell, the firelight cast long shadows across the camp. She sat alone, listening to the crackle of flames and the quiet murmurs around her. Somewhere nearby, the warrior lay within a lodge, his fate uncertain. She wondered if he understood what had been declared, if he had asked for it, or if the tribe had made the choice without him. She longed to ask him, to demand answers, but the gulf between their languages and her fear kept her silent. The stars shone bright above, endless and watchful. She wrapped her arms around her knees, feeling the child shift within her, as if reminding her that she was not alone in this. Her journey had begun as an escape, but now she stood at the edge of something far larger than herself. She had stepped into a world where every choice carried weight, where compassion could turn into destiny. In the stillness of that night, she realized she had no control over how they saw her. To them, she was no longer a runaway woman. She was something sacred, bound to their warrior, bound to their people. Whether she wanted it or not, her life and the life within her now rested in the hands of the tribe. And as the drums beat low into the night, she wondered if she had saved a man's life if she had surrendered her own freedom forever. the nights in the Apache camp were never truly silent. Even when the fire dimmed to embers, the land itself seemed to breathe. Coyotes sang in the distance, owls called from the trees, and the low hum of voices drifted from the lodges where families gathered. For her, each sound carried a weight. She lay awake, her body weary, yet her mind restless, replaying the words that had been spoken, sacred wife. The title clung to her, strange and heavy, as though she had been wrapped in a garment that did not fit. She had not asked for it, yet the tribe had spoken, and the decision seemed final. In the days that followed, the rhythm of the camp became both a comfort and a prison. The women brought her food, guiding her gently but firmly into the tasks of their daily life. They taught her to grind corn, to mend hides, to fetch water from the stream. Some did so with kindness, offering soft smiles, while others watched her with narrowed eyes, as though waiting for her to falter. She tried to learn quickly, for she sensed that every mistake was judged, every hesitation whispered about when her back was turned. The wounded warrior remained the center of attention. His name, she came to learn, was whispered as though it carried weights, spoken with reverence, like someone of importance. She visited his lodge often, unsure if she was welcome, but drawn there by the bond she had unknowingly formed with him. Each time, she found him stronger. The color slowly returned to his face, his eyes clearer, his voice steadier. When their gazes met, a silence passed between them, filled with questions neither could voice. One evening, as she entered with a bowl of broth, she found him sitting upright, his dark eyes fixed on her. He spoke a few words in English, halting but clear. He called her the word they had given, sacred wife. The way he said it made her heart quicken, not out of romance, but out of fear. She shook her head, explaining softly that she had only done what she felt was right, nothing more. He listened, then said something in his own tongue that she did not understand, though his tone carried both respect and warning. Around the fire, whispers grew. Some of the younger men questioned why an outsider had been given such a title. Their eyes lingered on her, not with reverence but with doubt. Others argued that her act of compassion had marked her with something beyond human choice. She could hear their voices in the night, low and tense, though they never spoke of it in her presence. The older man, who had first declared her sacred wife, remained a figure of authority. She learned his name slowly from listening. He was a leader, a voice others followed. When he looked at her, she felt weighed, as though he could see beyond her skin into her thoughts. It unsettled her, but she also sensed he was the one who kept the others from casting her out. The child within her grew restless as the days stretched on. She felt the movements stronger, more insistent, and with them came a fresh wave of fear. Would this tribe accept the child as their own? Or would the birth reveal a truth that left her cast aside, a stranger once again? The thought haunted her at night when the camp was still. Tension brewed not only around her but within the tribe itself. She noticed how food was rationed carefully, how scouts rode out daily and returned with reports that stirred unease. Something pressed at the edges of their world. She caught fragments of conversation, mention of soldiers, of settlers pushing closer, of conflicts that loomed near. The tribe carried itself with a quiet readiness, as if the land itself had warned them of what was to come. In this atmosphere, her presence became a symbol. To some, she was a sign of protection, chosen by fate to tie her life to theirs. To others, she was a risk, a reminder of the world pressing against their borders. This division deepened as the wounded warrior's strength returned. His recovery seemed to confirm the belief that she had been touched by something sacred. Yet for every nod of approval, there was also a glare of mistrust. She felt the divide most sharply one afternoon by the river. The women had taken her to wash clothes, their laughter and chatter filling the air. For a brief moment, she almost felt part of their circle. But when she turned, she caught two of them watching her belly with narrowed eyes, whispering words she could not understand. Their tone was sharp, and though she did not know the language, she knew suspicion when she heard it. Her hands tightened on the wet cloth as the weight of their doubt settled heavily upon her. That night, she sat near the fire, listening as drums began to beat, slow and steady, carrying across the valley. A ceremony was taking place, one she did not fully understand. The tribe gathered, their movements solemn, their faces painted in patterns that glowed under the firelight. She was guided to the circle, seated near the front, though she longed to fade into the shadows. The leader spoke, his voice commanding, and though she caught only fragments, she understood that the ceremony was tied to her. The words "sacred wife" rang out again and again, spoken with reverence. The warrior was brought forth, his steps unsteady, but his spirit unbroken. His gaze found hers across the firelight, and in that gaze she felt the weight of expectation. The tribe chanted, their voices rising, and she realized they were binding her more firmly into this role. She had not chosen it, yet the decision was no longer hers to make. Afterward, she slipped away into the darkness, her heart pounding. She wandered to the edge of the camp, staring out at the endless prairie. The stars burned cold and distant, and the wind whispered through the grass. She pressed her hands to her belly, whispering to the child that she would find a way, though she did not know how. It was then that a shadow moved near her. One of the younger men stepped forward, his face half hidden by the moonlight. His voice was low, tense, his English broken but clear enough. He warned her that not all accepted her place, that some believed her presence would bring misfortune. He told her to be careful, to watch her steps, for even among those who smiled at her, danger might wait. She thanked him, though her voice trembled, and when he melted back into the darkness, she felt more alone than ever. The camp that had begun to feel like a shelter now seemed filled with unseen eyes, measuring her worth, weighing her every move. The days grew hotter, the air thick with the scent of dust and sage. Scouts rode out farther, returning with grim faces. The talk of soldiers grew louder, and with it, the tribe's restlessness. She saw preparations, bows strung tighter, arrows sharpened, horses readied. The warrior, though still healing, joined these gatherings, his presence commanding. Each time he returned, he looked at her with an expression she could not decipher. Was it protection he offered, or a silent demand that she fulfill the role thrust upon her? At night, when the fire died low, she dreamed of the cabin she had left, of the chains she had fled, of the wide unknown that stretched before her. She woke with sweat on her brow, torn between relief and dread. The Apache camp was both a refuge and a snare, a place where she had saved a man's life, yet lost the freedom she had once sought. Her story was no longer only hers. It had become tied to the warrior, to the child within her, to the tribe who now whispered her name with awe or suspicion. And though the drums of conflict beat louder with each passing day, the true battle for her had already begun, the struggle between the life she had chosen to escape and the one that had chosen her in return. And in the quiet moments when the wind carried voices she did not understand, she wondered which fate was more dangerous, the enemies pressing in from the outside, or the doubts that festered within the very camp where she now lived. The air grew heavier with each passing day, as if the land itself braced for a storm that had not yet broken. The Apache camp no longer carried the steady rhythm of daily life. Instead, there was an urgency in every movement, a sharpness in every word. Men sharpened weapons late into the night, their faces lit by flickering firelight, their voices low and tense. Women prepared bundles of food and hides, their hands moving quickly, their eyes often darting toward the horizon. Even the children sensed the unease, their laughter subdued, their games quieter. She felt the change most sharply in the way the people looked at her. No longer was it simple curiosity or cautious respect. Now it was as if her very presence carried meaning, tied to the danger that loomed ever closer. Some bowed their heads when she passed, whispering about sacred wife, while others turned away with narrowed eyes, as though blaming her for the shadow pressing against their world. The wounded warrior, her link to all of this, was no longer weak. His strength had returned, though the scar at his side remained raw. He carried himself with the weight of a man who bore responsibility not only for himself, but for his people. When their gazes met, she saw in him both gratitude and something unspoken, as if he believed fate had woven their paths together. Yet she still did not know what he truly felt about her, about the title the tribe had forced upon her. One evening, she found herself at the edge of the camp, staring out at the plains where the grass rippled like waves beneath the wind. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see the older leader. His eyes studied her as though measuring not just her strength, but the child within her. He spoke slowly in English, his accent heavy, yet his meaning clear. He told her the tribe faced a trial. Soldiers were pushing closer, taking land, breaking promises. Blood had already been spilled. More would come. He said that people saw her as a sign, a bridge between worlds, but signs were fragile things. A bridge could be walked up and or broken. His words left her shaken. She wanted to protest, to say she had never asked for any of this, that she was only a woman running from her own troubles. But when she placed her hand against her swollen belly, she knew it was no longer just her story. The child made her more than herself, and the tribe had chosen to see meaning in that. The tension grew thicker when a scout returned one morning, his horse lathered in sweat, his face grim. He spoke rapidly, his words sharp and clipped, and though she could not understand all of it, the camp's reaction told her enough. Our soldiers were near, too near. The camp erupted in movement. Weapons were gathered, fires smothered, lodges readied for quick dismantling. The warrior stood at the center of it, his voice carrying commands that cut through the chaos. She watched him, both fearful and in awe. He was not just a man she had saved. He was a leader, someone who carried the weight of lives on his shoulders. And somehow, because of her choice at that creek, she was bound to his fate. That night the drums began again, faster now, echoing through the valley like a heartbeat. The women around her chanting prayers. They placed hands on her shoulders, on her belly, their words a mixture of blessing and plea. She understood enough to know they believed she carried something more than a child. To them, she carried a promise, a future that might save them in the face of what was coming. The pressure pressed down on her chest until she could hardly breathe, trying to cry out that she was no savior, no sacred figure. She was simply a woman who had chosen compassion once and now found herself caught in a net too wide to escape. But their eyes burned with hope and fear, and she could not bring herself to shatter it. The younger warriors eyed her differently. One in particular, the same who had warned her weeks before, approached her quietly after the prayers. His face was tense, his voice urgent. He told her the soldiers were not coming to talk. They came with rifles and fire, and they would not hesitate to destroy what they could not control. He said some among the tribe doubted she was a gift. Some feared she was a curse. If the camp fell, she might not survive, no matter what title had been given to her. Her nights grew sleepless, haunted by the weight of his words. She dreamed of fire sweeping across the valley, of shouts and screams, of the child in her arms as she fled through darkness. She woke each time with her breath ragged, her body trembling. The warrior came to her often now, his presence steady but filled with expectation. He sat across the fire from her, speaking words in his tongue she could not fully grasp. Yet his eyes told her enough. He wanted her to trust him, to stand by him when the storm broke. She wondered if he saw her as a partner or as a piece of the fate his people had placed upon them both. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, the tribe gathered in a wide circle. The leader spoke, his words solemn, his voice carrying across the crowd. She caught the rhythm of it, even if not the full meaning. It was a call to prepare, to stand together, to protect what was theirs. Then he turned his gaze upon her, raising his hand, and the words "sacred wife" rang out once more. The people echoed it, their voices rising, some with conviction, others with doubt. She felt the weight of 100 eyes upon her, pressing her deeper into a role she did not understand, one she had no way to escape. The warrior stepped forward, standing beside her, his hand brushing her arm. It was a gesture meant for the tribe, as much as for her, a claim that she was part of this fight whether she wished it or not. Her heart hammered in her chest, fear and confusion tangling until she could hardly breathe. The days that followed moved like a gathering storm. Scouts brought word of soldiers moving in columns, their numbers too many, their weapons too powerful. The tribe debated fiercely. Some argued to flee deeper into the hills. Others demanded to stand and fight. The older leader held them together, but she could feel the cracks forming, the doubts whispering beneath the surface. Amid this, her own conflict grew. The child within her was restless, reminding her with every movement that her choices were no longer hers alone. She thought often of fleeing in the night, of taking her horse and disappearing into the prairie. But each time she looked toward the horizon, fear stopped her. Alone she would not survive. And if she ran, the tribe might believe the title they had given her had been a lie, a betrayal. The suspense pressed tighter when another scout returned, his voice sharp with urgency. The soldiers were only days away. The valley would not remain hidden much longer. The people moved swiftly, preparing for battle and for flight, their chants and songs now carrying a fierceness that made her blood run cold. That night, the warrior came to her lodge. His shadow filled the space, his presence heavy. He knelt before her, speaking slowly, his broken English mixing with his native tongue. He told her she was bound to him now, not only by the tribe's word, but by the choice she had made when she saved his life. He said the days ahead would decide everything for him, for her, for the child. Her throat tightened, tears pricking her eyes, but she said nothing. She could only stare into his dark gaze, knowing that whatever storm was about to break, she was standing in the heart of it. The next morning, the valley stirred with an energy unlike anything she had felt before. The warriors painted their faces, the women sang prayers, the drums beat faster, echoing like thunder. She stood among them, her heart racing, her body trembling, caught between the life she had fled and the one she had unwillingly entered. And as the sun rose over the ridges, she heard the faint echo of rifles in the distance, sharp and cold, carrying across the prairie. The sound cut through the air, and the camp froze. It had begun. The storm she had feared was no longer waiting on the horizon. It was here, and she was trapped in the middle, bound by fate, with no way to turn back. The first rifle shots shattered the dawn, echoing through the valley like thunder tearing the sky apart. Horses reared, warriors shouted, and women pulled children back toward the lodges. The air filled with smoke, dust, and the sharp cries of men preparing for what could not be avoided. She stood in the midst of it, clutching her swollen belly, her breath caught between fear and disbelief. The world she had tried to escape, the world she had stumbled into, both collided here, in this place that was about to be torn apart. The Apache warriors moved quickly, forming lines, bows strung tight, rifles raised where they had them. The older leader barked commands, his voice steady even as the sound of soldiers grew louder. She saw the warrior she had saved step forward, his scarred side hidden beneath painted skin, his eyes burning with fire. He looked back at her once, not with fear, but with a strength that seemed to anchor her in the storm, lifted his hand, as though to promise she was not forgotten, then turned toward the ridge where the soldiers were closing in. She was pulled toward the women, their hands firm on her arms, guiding her to the rear of the camp. Some carried bundles, others carried children. Their faces were grim, their eyes heavy with the knowledge that survival meant sacrifice. She wanted to cry out, to demand to stay near the warrior, but the women's grip was unyielding. They told her without words that her place was here among them, with the unborn child whose cry might one day outlast the noise of war. The gunfire grew louder, sharper, until it cracked the morning like glass. Smoke drifted over the ridges as soldiers advanced, their uniforms stark against the wild land. Arrows cut the air, cries rose, and the clash of two worlds shook the valley. She crouched low with the women, pressing her hand to her belly, whispering prayers she barely believed in. The child stirred as though sensing her terror, reminding her that no matter what happened, she must endure. Hours passed in a blur of noise and fear. The battle raged, moving across the valley in waves. At times it seemed the Apache held their ground, their cries rising in victory. At others the roar of rifles pressed them back, forcing them to retreat. She did not see the warrior again, though his shadow filled her thoughts. She imagined him standing tall, fighting not only for his people, but for her, for the child, for the strange fate that had bound them together. When the fighting finally dulled, the valley was covered in smoke and silence. The soldiers withdrew, leaving behind only the echoes of their destruction. The camp was torn, the ground scarred, but the people endured. The warriors returned slowly, their numbers fewer, their faces grim. Some carried wounds, others carried grief. The older leader walked among them, steadying those who faltered, gathering the survivors like a shepherd with a scattered flock. And then she saw him, the warrior she had saved. He walked with a limp, his side bandaged anew, but his eyes still burned with life. When he reached her, she rose on trembling legs, her breath catching. For a moment, words failed them both. Then he placed his hand gently on her shoulder, his touch steady, his gaze holding hers with quiet strength. In that simple gesture, she knew what words could not say. He had fought not only for his people, but for the bond that fate had tied between them. In the days that followed, the camp rebuilt. Lodges were mended, fires rekindled, and the wounded were tended with care. The people mourned their losses, yet they also gave thanks for survival. She worked beside the women, her body heavy with the nearing birth, her spirit carrying both weariness and a strange kind of peace. For the first time, she felt she was not merely an outsider. She had become part of something larger, something bound by more than fear or chance. The older leader spoke with her one evening, his eyes softer than she had ever seen them. He told her, in his slow English, that her choice at the creek had changed more than she knew. By saving the warriors, she had saved a piece of their people's hope. By staying through the storm, she had proven herself more than a stranger. She had been named Sacred Wife not by chance, but by the way she had stood when others might have fled. When her time came, the women gathered close, their hands steady, their voices carrying songs of comfort. The warrior stood outside, waiting, his face tense with both fear and anticipation. The child was born as dawn broke, the sky painted with fire and gold, as though the land itself celebrated. A strong cry filled the lodge, cutting through the silence, bringing tears to her eyes. She held the child close, whispering promises of safety, of love, of a life shaped not by chains but by choice. The tribe welcomed the child with reverence, their voices soft yet filled with meaning. They touched the infant's small hands, blessing the future, seeing in the child both the blood of their own and the spirit of the woman who had once been a stranger. The warrior entered then, kneeling at her side, his eyes wide as he gazed at the child. He reached out, his hand trembling as he touched the tiny fingers. Their eyes met, and in that moment no words were needed. The days turned to weeks, and the camp found its rhythm again. The threat of soldiers remained, but for now there was peace. She walked among the people, carrying her child, no longer just the runaway she had once been. She was part of the tribe, part of the stories whispered by the fire, part of the prayers spoken under the stars. The title Sacred Wife no longer felt like a burden pressed upon her. It had become a truth she carried, not because the tribe had named her so, but because she had chosen to live it. At night, when the stars stretched endless above, she thought back to the moment she had first seen the wounded warrior at the creek. She remembered the fear, the choice, the blood on her hands. She thought of the path that choice had set before her, a path that led not to escape, but to belonging. She understood now that freedom was not always found in running. Sometimes it was found in standing still, in choosing compassion when fear said to walk away. Her journey had begun with flight, but it ended with roots. She had become more than a runaway, more than a woman caught between two worlds. She had become a bridge, a mother, a wife not by force, but by the bond of shared survival. Her story, and the story of the child she carried, would live on in the songs of the people, in the whispers of the prairie wind, in the firelight where truths were spoken. And as the seasons turned, and the camp thrived despite the dangers beyond the ridges, she found herself at peace. The child grew strong, cradled by the love of many. The warrior stood beside her, scarred but unbroken, his presence steady as the land itself. Together they had faced fear, loss, and uncertainty. Together they had found something greater than either had sought. Her escape had ended the moment she stopped at the creek, but in stopping, she had found the beginning of a life she never imagined. She was no longer running. She was home.